This is a Voyescape podcast. You can find all of our travel podcasts from around the world at voyescape.com.
I hope in 2025, the algorithm will reward people that are not making rage bait content.
I think that
I'm asking too
very
much.
Optimistic.
What does it mean to travel better? Some people might seek to travel better by figuring out the best hacks for booking flights or finding the most off-the-beaten-path places to go. But for me, traveling better isn't about me. It's about decentering ourselves in our travels and focusing on how we can approach travel in a mindful and respectful way, in a way that is better for the people we visit and for the planet. Because, contrary to the old adage, no, the world is not your oyster. Today, I'm chatting with fellow podcaster Amanda Kendall about the things we can do to be more mindful travelers. Amanda is the host of the Thoughtful Travel podcast, where she chats with fellow travelers about their experiences and what they've learned from their travels. This is Curious Tourism, the podcast focused on making travel better for people and for the planet. I'm Erin Hines, travel writer and content creator, and I'm joined by my producer, Katie Lohr.
If you enjoy the show, Erin and I would love you to support it. If you can do one good thing this year, it is support our podcast by telling somebody about it or just finding ways to interact with us and telling us what you want to hear about. The comments are open on Spotify, and you can also leave us a very nice review on Apple Podcasts if you're into it.
You can also get in touch with us directly on social media or by email. All our contact info is in the show notes. So, Amanda, welcome back to Curious Tourism.
Thank you, Erin and Katie. It's so exciting to be here again. I love chatting with you.
I love chatting with you too. And I'm really happy we got you on for the first episode of the year, especially what we're chatting about. I feel like this is a nice start to the year to just have a little huddle to talk about how we can all be better tourists in 2025.
I think it's important to just, start the year with the right intentions and some good reminders.
So there is something I wanted to chat about before we dive into the good stuff, and it is some travel news that I have seen circulating, and it's actually travel news that's been in the works now for quite a while. I used to post TikTok videos about this and get a whole lot of angry comments about it, and 2025 is the year that it is coming to fruition, and that is that the UK and the EU are introducing ETAs. The EU calls it an ETIAS, and they will be implemented and applied to many people, including Canadians and Australians. And basically what this means is we will have to apply for, it's essentially an e-visa ahead of arrival in the country and pay a fee. Canadians, and I think Australians, have never had to do this before to visit the EU or the UK, and a lot of people are upset about it. So I'm just going to say right off the bat, we shouldn't be. I had a friend visit me from the UK over Christmas, and I asked him, I was like, so how much money did you pay to come to our country? And he told me he paid £10. So this is fair. This is fair that we have to pay the fee as well. What do you think, Amanda?
Absolutely. I mean, I have no issue with, especially pretty much on-demand, electronic. Yeah, there's a whole lot of processing that goes into having people come into countries. I don't mind that at all. And the people who get outraged by it, well, I get outraged by their outrage, to be honest.
Me too.
Erin, did you mention how much the fee is? Do you know?
Ooh, let me check. Oh, hold on. Us going in is £10 as Canadians. So he paid less. I can't remember what he told me he paid, but I know it was less. And for the EU... it's not much. It's something around that, £10, which I think is around 15 Canadian dollars for us, 15 to 20, which is reasonable. I've paid a lot more to enter a country in the past.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, let me add my Australian outrage, not my outrage, the outrage in Australia at the moment that's similar, and I get similarly angry about it, is that the fees to get an Australian passport have just leapt fairly high. They were already pretty high, and there's all these news stories going around about the Australian passport being the most expensive in the world, and people are very outraged by having to pay this much for their passport. It is relatively expensive, so it is 412 Australian dollars for a 10-year adult passport. So
that sounds like a lot.
It's a bit pricey.
It is quite a lot.
Let me see how much that is in Canadian. So we have a point of reference.
You've got to have
That is 370 Canadian dollars. Let's see how much it is in US, and 255 US. So yeah, that's a lot. That's like more than double what Canadians pay for a 10-year passport.
And it is a big chunk at once. Like a friend of mine, last week she had to go and apply for her and her husband and her 2 kids' passports. And so that's a
like
lot
a K
in
right
one
there.
go. But she didn't complain because she's like a sensible, lovely person. She was like, and they last for 10 years, et cetera, et cetera. Some people say that's only $40 a year. But above all, and it's the same with the visas, we have the massive privilege of obviously being able to afford to travel. And that is just one of the costs that come with it. And the vast majority of the people in the world never get to travel and leave their country. So aren't we lucky to be able to pay this money? I mean, I wish it was a bit less too, sure. But
I wish it was more accessible. Like that would be, maybe more people would travel if like the cost of a passport was more accessible. Although I gotta say, like, especially when you're in Australia, where to travel to another country, like basically involves an expensive flight, no matter what way you slice it. I think like if you have privilege enough to be able to fly to another country from Australia, you can probably afford the fees for a passport.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the case. I mean, I totally agree. Like from an accessibility point of view, that does make me a bit concerned. But I know that the people who are complaining about it, that's not their issue. They just don't want to give the government any money.
Pay it. Yeah.
Remind me again if travel insurance covers damaged passports, because that might be a nice benefit to have.
Ooh,
I don't reckon it does. And I must say that there has been also outrage here because we have these new super duper biometric passports that have like this whole plastic page that's been kind of sewn in, and they apparently don't wear very well and curl up quite quickly. And people have been saying, I paid all this money and look, it's already looking like a passport that people might not, their immigration somewhere might not let me in. So that's an additional controversy. My son's just got one of these brand newies, but it still looks fine and flat. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I got. I got a new one last year and it's the same. It has that like strange plastic page, but I do think it's like overall more durable than the previous one I had. But it's true. I would be pretty upset to pay that much. And then like in 2 years, it's rendered like unusable just because of a quality issue.
Yeah. I would hope they would replace those if it turned out that they were, manufactured poorly or something. But anyway.
I blasted through my last 10-year passport in 7. So I'm kind of scared about
stamps.
These fees increasing. Yeah. Although stamps, I was reading this as well, stamps are becoming obsolete.
Yeah. I think it depends where you go, because if you end up with a bunch of whole page visa stickers, then you can fill that up quickly. But yeah, otherwise it's very sad how infrequently I get stamps these days. All electronic, and you don't even speak to an immigration officer, and
I know.
through you go.
You just scan through. I'm trying to recall.
Same in Hong Kong recently. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like I'm trying to remember if I got one in Japan. I think I did.
Yeah. I think Japanese still do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like most of the places we went on our world trip, we still got them, which makes me happy because I love looking at my stamps.
Me too. They have such memories in them. I have all my old passports, and every stamp I can just imagine the situation. So.
And sometimes it's useful. Like I don't always journal dates, which is so silly, but like sometimes I literally can't remember like when I arrived in a place, and so I want to go refer to my stamp.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you need to fill out those awful, like for security clearance kind of things, when were you in which place and stuff. And then passport stamps are crazy useful. So I miss passport stamps.
Me too.
The analog nature of travel is disappearing.
The analog nature
eyes.
of everything. It's so
So
sad.
true. It's very sad. Yeah.
Yeah. I have had 3 occasions in the last 2 years where exiting a country, my heart has stopped because the immigration officer has said to me, "Where's your entrance stamp?" And I don't know why. This never happened to me before in my life, but 3 times this happened to me in the last 2-ish years. And it is so scary. So now every time Luke and I go through a country where you do get stamps, the first thing I do once we're through is I'm like, okay, we need to check that the stamp is actually in there.
But what would you do if you didn't have it?
What do? You freak out and you say, please look harder. Because it's so scary.
It is scary. I hate scary border crossings. We crossed into China when we were in Hong Kong recently, and it was one of those ones where they ask a lot of questions, and then they were asking me, well, where is Perth? Because that's on my passport as my birthplace. What country? And it's in Australia. And I was like, I didn't know. You start to think maybe it's the wrong answer.
I have this thing where I get so freaked out going through immigration that I overthink my answers, and sometimes I think I start to sound really suspicious. Because I'm stumbling over my answers. Whenever we do it, I'm like, Luke, let's go as a couple, and you do the talking, because I just sound like I have no idea what's going on.
Every time I go through Border Patrol, I have an existential crisis, basically, where I'm like, who am I anymore? Where do I live? I don't know my first, last name, middle name. I don't know my birthday anymore. I don't even know where I work or what my title is.
And I definitely don't know the reason why I'm entering this country.
Put me in jail. I deserve it.
Except probably the drug smugglers and whatever else people are doing. They're probably much more confident and they sail.
Probably. I would love to know. I mean, if you ever encounter someone who's done that, I would love to know.
I have an interview on my podcast from many years ago. It was a guy who bluffed his way into, I think it was Bangladesh. And he only realized when he got there that he needed a visa, which he didn't have. And he managed to bribe someone to say that he was a diplomat. And so he got through the diplomatic channels. And then as he got out the other side, they picked him up in a beautiful car to take him into the centre and stuff. Because they fully believed he was a diplomat, even though he was like a shaggy backpacker look.
All right, so we're going to go through some mindful travel tips that we think we should all be considering as we start planning our 2025 travels. Amanda, I've brought a few tips of my own, and then I'll hand it over to you and you can share maybe 1 or 2 that are top of mind for you. So the first point I want to touch on in this discussion about how to be a mindful traveler is something I touched on in the opening of this episode, and that is decentering ourselves. And this is a concept that we've touched on a few times now on Curious Tourism. We learned it originally from Joanna Haugen of Rooted Storytelling, who talks often about how the tourism industry is so centered around the experience of tourists, when it should actually be centering the communities that are welcoming the tourists instead. And if you go to her site, Rooted Storytelling, you'll find lots of great articles that she's written about this concept. And she's written really specific content about how the tourism industry could be doing this. So it is, of course, an industry issue. The industry really does center us as tourists. So it's hard as the tourist yourself not to pick up that perspective. But I do think we can do things as individual tourists to shift away from that mindset and to shift away from that style of travel. What are some ways that you think we as individual travelers can support this mission of decentering ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. It would be lovely if the tourism industry itself would just completely rethink and we didn't have to do all this hard work. But I think it's up to people like us who communicate these kind of ideas. I think the biggest shift for me is when I stopped thinking about where I was going as a quote-unquote destination, as in, this is the objective of the trip is to go to the destination and explore the destination and some of that kind of shifting language. So I think once I really started to think, hey, this is a place where people live, like the place where I live, and I am kind of invading this place, hopefully being welcomed because I'm hopefully providing some benefits to the the destination, the place, by arriving there. But it's so natural to use that language, we've used it for
I know.
our whole lives.
It's funny you bring this up because we had Vinci Ho on last year, who explain this to me, like why we should move away from using the word destination. And I just spent like 2 hours after that going through my blog, like replacing every mention. And now I actively it's becoming more natural, but it still slips out sometimes. And I do think there are contexts like where it makes sense to say that. But yeah, it's true. It's hard to move away from this more like colonial and like marketing speak for the act of tourism.
It is, yeah. But I think being quite intentional about using that right language helps you to remember. So I guess if I think about the place I'm going as someone's home and how should I behave in someone's home, whether, if the home is an individual home or a, 10 million person city, I try and find ways that I can be more respectful, or what will we do that has less impact? I mean, the whole kind of, everything we think about when we think about being better and more thoughtful travelers. But focusing on the place and its people as being the center of it all, and I land in there and I don't want to do any harm, and it would be nice if I could do something good. When you do that, it sounds to people like, oh, well, that's not fun. That's not going on a holiday. But it still is, because even with that mindset, or especially with that mindset, I think you will find the kinds of experiences that are the stories you tell later and the things that are memorable, and you'll feel kind of good doing it. You didn't come along and, buy 4 plastic water bottles a day because you didn't know how else to get safe water, and you didn't, come along and exploit, local kids selling stationery instead of being in school, because you've thought about it in advance, I think. So, yeah, that's kind of how I try and approach it.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. One of the ways I've tried to frame it for myself is to just take a moment and be more intentional in thinking about why I'm going to that place. So a good example, I think, would be when Luke and I went to Nepal this year. The original why was we want to trek. We could trek anywhere in the world, why Nepal? And once we had this discussion more deeply and realized okay, there's more to Nepal than trekking. We can't just go to Nepal to trek. And this is something that I'm telling everyone who's interested in Nepal now. Nepal is so much more than trekking. But it takes work to get to that place, because so much of what you read about Nepal is just about trekking. A lot of people, we encountered so many people that flew into Kathmandu, did their trek, came back to Kathmandu, flew home. And that was all they did. And so, yeah, we pursued a different kind of experience while we were there, which in that situation was to go to a homestay for several days. And it completely changed our perspective about Nepal. It helped us build connections with people who are Nepalese. And now when we talk about how badly we want to go back to Nepal, it's because we want to see those people again and experience life in Nepal again, not because we want to go look at a beautiful mountain. The mountains are beautiful, but there's a lot more to it than that. That was probably one of my first really meaningful experiences where I was oh, this is what it is to try to decenter yourself in a travel experience.
I don't want to open up a whole can of worms here, so if I do, please stop me. But this is interesting, and I'm curious to hear your insights, because something that I'm currently in the midst of is planning a Japan trip for my honeymoon next year. And I've obviously stumbled into the algorithm on Instagram of just pure Japan content. And everybody's sort of giving you tips about how to travel there, the unspoken rules. And obviously, I want to respect these unspoken rules, not walking and eating, not eating in public, looking out for the women-only trains and things like that. But the more that you start to kind of read things like that, it almost feels you start to exoticize this place a little bit more, and it becomes a little bit of a different sort of culture that you're ooh, I can't wait to experience this. And then you start to center yourself again. It's this weird cycle. So I don't know. How do you guys think I should approach this?
Oh, that's so interesting.
I will say off the bat, I don't think we can ever fully decenter ourselves. At the end of the day, if you have paid money to go to another country, it is centering yourself. You can never completely divorce yourself from that framework. But I do think we can do work to try to distance ourselves from the centering a bit more. And I don't know, I don't think that's such an interesting way to put it. I think of that more so as just being culturally aware.
thanks. I'll take that.
I think it's also how you present it. For example, if if you just, come across, a cultural habit, say, not eating and walking, and then you make sure you don't do that and you go around and find a nice quiet corner to sit and eat, which is my experience of Japan, because I'm hungry all the time, especially when you're in Japan and you keep finding amazing new food that you want to eat. And then you do that and that's fine. But then if you go on social media and say, hey, this country is so weird, no one walks around eating, isn't that, then that's decentering it back and doing all sorts of other damage as well. So, I think it's okay. Like Erin said, you can't fully decenter yourself ever, like in any part of life. We're like selfish creatures because we're trying to keep ourselves alive. We're focused on number one. So I think you can't, but I think perhaps it's how you react to it and what you do with that new knowledge or things you learn about.
For me, like decentering in Japan would be just like looking for opportunities to do like cultural learning, hiring guides, like doing classes, like a cooking class, stuff like that. And obviously like trying to book local accommodation. We couldn't find any homestays in Japan. I can dig around though and see if there's some.
You want to plan my trip
we
for
never
me,
went to. I definitely would like to provide some tips.
I'll try not to bombard this entire conversation.
I have a lot.
I could talk about Japan for 3 hours straight.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, same. I was just talking to my friend Lauren, another travel blogger, and she was like, I'm going to Japan for the first time this year, and everyone I mention this to just like launches into like a monologue about all the things I should do in Japan, and she was like, it's getting really overwhelming.
Yeah.
I can imagine.
So my second point today is about social media. I think in 2025, we can't have a discussion about more intentional travel without talking about social media, especially in being back from our world trip, which I shared a lot of online. This has been really top of mind for me. I've been thinking a lot like lately about like my relationship with social media. And I will say like I got kind of burnt out posting so much of our trip. And I realized like we're all posting too much. It's not really our fault because the algorithm kind of like demands it, especially if like it's your income and you're a full-time traveler. Like I understand why you have to publish so much. So yeah, that aside, in 2025, I would love for people to sort of pause like before they publish things and consider the message that their words, that their images and their videos send to people. I see so much rage bait on travel social media, as well as content that just doesn't have context. And I worry a lot about how this stuff can cause harm. So for example, videos where people list the reasons why they would never return to a specific country that they visited. It's a lot of like the rage bait content is like this negative stuff about places. And this is where the context piece comes in, right? It's like, you don't know how long that person spent there. A lot of it could be very subjective, like subjective experiences that formed their perspective of this country. I hope in 2025, like the algorithm will reward people that are not making rage bait content.
I think that
I'm asking too
very
much.
Optimistic. But I mean, you never know. Maybe there'll be like a brand new platform that is, that really centers on actually just being nice. But Erin, I have to say that, so many hundreds of people I follow, when you post on social media, I always know it will be like 1,000% ethical. And I'm always like, I actually learn a lot from you about the way, for example, when you travel, you try not to have other, strangers' faces in there, or, you're really, really respect, like much more than even me. I must do better, really respectful of other people around and not, involving them in your content. Because I see so much bad stuff and, people posting photos with little kids in, and they definitely did not consent and their parents have no idea what's going on, that kind of stuff, especially when you travel. Yeah, I also want to talk about the rage bait stuff because I see people just doing it, just to get engagement. And I don't know if it's what the algorithm serves up to me because I'm always commenting on it and trying to make people stop. perhaps, but it's the cultural
You're
difference.
feeding into it, Amanda.
I probably am. I should just walk away. But the cultural difference kind of rage bait, like, hey, did anyone ever notice that Americans always do X, Y? Why do they do that? And they're, trying to phrase it as like a genuine question, but really they're just trying to get people to come and argue with them. I'm like, stop doing this. And then some people will, possibly they do have a genuine question behind it, but they frame it in that way. I'm like, you wouldn't say that to someone if you had, in this case, like an American or a group of Americans in front of you. You wouldn't discuss that like that.
Yeah.
You would ask in a respectful way. Just be respectful everywhere.
Yeah, it's funny to me too, because rage bait, like, I don't know that that's like a nice experience for the poster either. Like, anytime I've had a video go viral in the wrong way, it's like very not fun. And the thing about it too is like, it's not going to help you build the audience that you want. I don't know. I'm kind of hopeful because I do feel like, and I'm curious what you think, Amanda, I feel like in the last 2 years specifically, I'm noticing people talking about being more responsible in their travels more actively in their content. It could just be that I'm building a really nice echo chamber for myself online, which is very likely. But I do feel like I'm just seeing it weaved into more discussion than I used to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. It could also be my echo chamber. But what I would say to counter that is that I have had more like normal people in my life who aren't part of travel media come to me and they've noticed the stuff I'm saying. Like a friend of mine who's usually a real like detailed planner, and she's actually going to Japan, as everybody is lately, later in the year with her sons. And she asked me for a bit of advice, and she said, hey, so you know how you talk about slow travel? And so I thought maybe I should cut out this and this city and just stay longer there. Is that what you'd say? I'm like, that's exactly what I'd say. She goes, oh, see, I do take notice of the things you post. And I don't think she listens to my podcast or, reads anything in depth, but just little bits from like my Instagram she would follow and stuff like that. And I've had more and more of those kind of situations where I think, the normal, quote unquote, normal traveler who doesn't get to travel too frequently and kind of understandably they're pretty centered, on themselves on their infrequent trips. But I have noticed more and more people starting to think about, how to do this in a better way. So, yeah, I think we are getting there. And, media, like mainstream media talks about it more. I do think there's some improvements.
I do too. It gives me hope. I'm feeling very positive at the start of 2025.
We're having an optimistic
Despite
2025.
some parts of the world literally going up in flames. I'm positive about this one thing.
When it comes to rage bait, though, because I think the dream is that people stop posting this content. And I would imagine people would stop posting this kind of content if people stopped engaging with it. And that's where media literacy comes in, because how do you even spot if it's somebody being just a rage baity kind of person, or they are just genuinely like ignorant to these facts about the world and they just haven't traveled that much. So do you guys have any tips for people to on how to spot rage bait online so that they just don't engage with it?
I mean, my first tip is that, like, exactly what you say, some of these people are actually really experienced travelers, and you can tell that very quickly by having a quick look at their profile. And so at least then I would usually step away from the conversation. So that's like my first tip.
The way I know I've spotted it is because I'll see something and I'll feel anger or distress.
What does your heart tell you?
And then I think, oh, maybe this is rage bait.
This is very true.
Just see how you feel, I guess. Yeah, like when I feel the urge to argue, that's when I know it's rage bait. And I'm actually like not fully against engaging. I think if you engage in the right way, which is to like leave a comment that actually calls out what is happening in the video, not just like getting into the weeds and arguing about whatever they're intending you to argue about, but calling out the fact that it's rage bait, I think can sometimes have an impact, because a lot of people are going to that comment section, and so throwing one extra comment in there that just calls attention to the fact that it's rage bait, I don't think that's like a bad thing. Yeah, I think like I just try not to engage with it, because the more you engage with that content, the more the algorithm will serve it to you. And I don't want to be sad, so I try to avoid it. I know this is a big shift from my positivity like 20 seconds ago, but I'm pretty worried about the changes that Zuckerberg is making to Meta. I think like we're going to start seeing a lot more rage bait, and really problematic rage bait on probably Facebook, Instagram, maybe threads. I hope not, but time will tell. Okay, so point number 3. I wanted to bring this one up because Katie and I did an episode on it, like 4 years ago. It feels like a lifetime ago now. And we haven't really talked about it that much since. So we're going to talk about wildlife. And the reason I wanted to talk about it is because not long ago, I came across a video, here we go, on Instagram of a person, a creator, a rather well-known creator, walking lions in Zambia. And I couldn't believe it. I just feel like in my little echo chamber of a travel community, it's so common knowledge now that we shouldn't touch, ride, wash, feed wildlife like under any conditions. But there are definitely a lot of people out there who are continuing to do this and continuing to like post about themselves doing this. And I don't want to shame anyone. The industry is providing these experiences like they are being offered. And often it's like kind of insidious. They're offered in a way that makes you think that they're responsible. So I think the solution here really is about education. Amanda, where are you at when it comes to wildlife and tourism?
Yeah, so I have, I've done quite a few episodes on this topic over the last few years because I get really upset by it. And like 10 years ago, I knew nothing about this. I still vividly remember someone not calling me out because I actually hadn't done anything yet, but I'd posted that I was going to Bali for the first time, and a girl I knew said in the comments, "Don't ride an elephant." And that was the first time, it's probably 10 or 12 years ago, the first time I'd really heard about it. So I really remember vividly thinking, oh, why? And, since then, obviously I've learnt so much. And so I think you're right. We can't call people out about it, but try and educate. And I do think it's improving not just in our echo chambers, but it's still got a long way to go. Like recently there was that tourist who sadly was killed in Spain when she was washing an elephant. Okay, and she was at a sanctuary, quote unquote sanctuary. So, that's part of the problem is that, it looks like from the surface like, oh, well, it says sanctuary, so it must be okay. But what I really appreciated about that story was that I read quite a lot of different versions of it in different media. But in every case, they actually, whether they highlighted it properly or they just mentioned it, kind of in the small print, but they all said, actually, this is not okay, even though it says sanctuary, this is not best practice, and so we shouldn't be doing this. And I am sure even 2 or 3 years ago, such articles would not have mentioned that. So I think that it is improving a lot. But also what I keep learning is that there's so many grey areas in it. Like I was speaking with a woman from World Animal Protection recently, and you can't get any greater wildlife warrior than someone who's, working with World Animal Protection. But she said again to me, it's so grey and it's hard to know all of the right things to do. For example, if we fixed everything and let go all of the animals who are currently being in tourist attractions, that's a huge problem though. There's many, tens of thousands of animals that can't survive, that they need to still be looked after because they've been brought up in captivity, that, they've, adjusted to life like this. Plus the human impact, like when they initially stopped elephants logging in Thailand and moved them, they had to do something with all of those elephants. There was no space to just let them go. And all of those families who had been relying on the livelihood of owning an elephant, and you can't just, abandon, thousands of families. And so every stage along the way has all of these adjustments to be made. And so then there is space still for good sanctuaries. But in the eventually the hope is that won't be needed, or that there'll just be those, injured rescued wildlife that will be those kind of ambassador animals that, help us connect to wildlife without having to, go as far as a usual safari or whatever. But sorry, all of that to say, yes, it's very tricky, but I think a lot more people are understanding. But we still need to keep talking about it a lot so that, people are continuing to be educated and they don't just think, oh, I should do the right thing, see sanctuary or whatever, or rescue on it and think that that's fine, and away they go.
It's tough. I mean, we've talked about this before, like humans, like we love animals. We want to be close to animals. It's like, in a way, like I understand why people struggle to wrap their heads around this, because like it's hard to fight that urge to like be close to such a beautiful creature. But I will say, like, seeing elephants in the wild has been the most incredible way to ever see an elephant, like in my experience. And so I think that people can get the same sort of like experience out of an observation only tourism experience versus like one where you're up close and touching the animal.
In Australia, there's only one state left where you can touch a koala. And of course, koalas are, okay, an elephant, that's a huge animal. It will harm you if, it can kill you, obviously. A koala is a harmless, very cute animal that looks super cuddly. And, I see
They're
and
so cute.
They are very cute. And seeing them in the wild means that they're in the top of a very tall tree far away and all you can see is like a fluffy bum of a koala, Oh. So I understand how people really, really want this experience. And I see like on, forums about Australia, traveling to Australia, a lot of tourists from outside Australia like desperate to do this. So I understand, but it's actually super harmful, and even just touching them with, our dirty hands, apart from all of the other issues of they shouldn't, it's very detrimental to them. It does need so much education and so much decentering, I suppose. Like, let's put the good of the wildlife ahead of our own selfish desire. And it's hard to do that, but we need to keep talking about it. So it's easier to say, hey, this is a wild animal that will kill you. But when you've got like a docile koala that's just sleeps 23 hours a day. We have to go one step further.
What's your take on the quokkas on
Rottnest?
It's near you, actually.
It's right near me. So yes, if I swam in this direction, people do swim, but I wouldn't swim because there's also sharks in between.
People swim?
Every year they have a Rottnest swim, and it's
Australians are built different. That is wild. I could barely make the boat trip. The boat trip I found quite harrowing. I can't imagine swimming that.
It's quite a badge of honour to have done the Rottnest swim, especially solo. But anyway, so for many years, the tourism board here was promoting quokka selfies because, they're pretty cute marsupials. They look like they're smiling. And it took a lot of lobbying for them to stop using that as one of their key promotional tools. But they now don't promote it and they just talk about seeing quokkas without. But it's really difficult because they are pretty tame. And, if you leave food around, they will come and eat it. But obviously it's not good for them. And, people still try to get their quokka selfie or just try to get them close. So I'm a very, very anti-quokka selfie person. Yeah, it was so entrenched for many years that it's really hard to undo that thinking.
Friendly reminder that we can do hard things. We cannot touch cute animals.
Yeah.
It is possible.
Yes, exactly. So true, Katie.
This leads me into my next point quite well, which is intentionality. Something I've realized myself over the last few years as I've been on my own journey into traveling in a more responsible way is that one of the simplest ways to be more responsible is to just put intention behind it. So this can mean being more intentional about the accommodations that you book or taking extra time to ensure that the place you're booking is locally owned. It can be the intention to include a homestay in your travel experience or the intention to travel in the off season or the shoulder season to help reduce the impact of over-tourism. I think it's just pausing for a moment and thinking about that why. So what are some ways that you're trying to be more intentional in your travels, Amanda?
Yeah, a lot of those things that you say, although I must say I haven't done a homestay for many years. I was inspired by your recent ones to look into those again. But I think above all, the thing I do mostly to try and be more intentional is to ironically be less intentional, plan less. So, I really try very hard to make sure wherever I go, I can stay there as long as possible, longer than maybe the average tourist would, to not plan everything, to leave room for lots of local experiences, for asking people once I'm there, for meeting people and leaving space for different kinds of adventures, I suppose, and also the intentionality of doing a bit of research and just trying. I know a lot of people say, but I don't have time to do that. And okay, you can't do everything perfectly. But for example, a few years ago, we were in Copenhagen in Denmark. And I often give this example because I needed to rent bicycles. We decided we would rent bicycles because, that's how the Danes get around. I had my son with me who was maybe 9 or 10 at the time, great bike rider. That's a perfect thing to do. And so, okay, I need to rent a bike. So I go online and Google, and, it only took me an extra couple of minutes to search through the different rental places and find one that was also a social enterprise. And, they took bicycles down to Mozambique. They also took their staff down and trained up locals in Mozambique to be bicycle repair people, giving them a livelihood, etc., because they'd found some places there that, were, lacking in bicycles but needed. So, it didn't take me really any longer to book that, but it was giving back in lots of different ways rather than just going to, I don't know anything about the bicycle rental market in Copenhagen, but maybe some of them were like, big multinational corporation owned, I don't know. But, it often doesn't take much time to just do a little bit more. But above all, like, not planning much, I think, leaves a lot more space for being more intentional, because once you're there on the ground, then it's a lot easier to figure out how can I be here in a way that has a good impact.
Yes, I love this because it's actually something I've been thinking about, like the whole planning aspect, because people love to talk about this. Like I find there's some people that are like, oh, I never plan anything when I travel. Like I wing everything. And then there's people that love to plan like every minute. And the way I've been thinking about it lately is like there's some planning that you should do, but you shouldn't overdo it, which is what I think we're saying is like,
yes, a happy medium.
You want to take time to do some planning around, and planning is more like research, I guess is what I'm saying. Like research cultural norms, research things that are really essential to know before you go to a place, but don't overplan like your day to day in that place. Cause it's so true. Like some of the best experiences Luke and I have had, like especially on our last trip, were just like days that we woke up and did not have a plan and just went walking 100%.
Around. 100%. When I was in Hong Kong recently, obviously we went to stay with friends, which helps a lot in all of this because you've got a local contact. But, even they were like, oh, you could go here and here. And we did a few kind of typical touristy things, which were great. But my favorite day was the day we got up and they said, hey, one of our colleagues recommended this Danish Christmas market over on Hong Kong Island. And so we went there and it was nuts. And then we went to a dog adoption meetup because our local friends were adopting a dog. And the way they did it was they had all the like foster carers bring their dogs into Central and met up at a cafe. So I got to meet all these cool people and all these dogs, and it was fabulous. So, like that was our, and we had a drink nearby on the way home before we caught the ferry. Like, I couldn't have planned that. That doesn't exist on the tourist brochure, but it was a great day.
I'll add that intentionality is something that I am deeply facing right now in my upcoming travel plans to Japan. Something I wrote down in the script and I realized I might as well just address it now is that patience has been really hard for me, but I feel like so key in making sure that this is a good, responsible trip that is like valuable. I'm finding it so hard not to just like hop on flight deals right now and just like go, because I'm consuming so much Japan content and I'm so excited about all these things. But it was actually my partner, Mark, who was like been slowing me down a little bit because he's like, Katie, I want to go to Japan because I want to see Japanese baseball. And like, we have to go at the beginning of the season. So we're not going during like peak season in the springtime when everybody's there. Let's go in the shoulder season and at the beginning of the baseball season when it's going to be really exciting. And he's been like really slowing me down and making sure we're very intentional about how we approach this trip. Cause like, it's so hard not to get excited and just like make that impulse buy, especially when you see so many people going to Japan right now. And you see articles coming out being like 2025 is the cheapest time to travel to Japan.
I kind of low-key hate that people keep using this as like, oh, go take advantage of the fact that they're struggling.
Yes,
in
exactly.
Japan right now. Like, what a weird way to frame it. Luke and I were talking about this recently. So because we don't like plan tons when we go on our trips, I feel that Luke and I don't tap into the anticipation vibe that you have before a trip. And I think it's also, especially because we traveled so much last year, it sort of like gets ironed out of you, the anticipation part, which is really sad. And so now we've been home for the longest we've been home, like of 2024. It's not even the same year anymore, but we've been home for like over a month, which is the longest stretch now for a while for us. And Luke is planning a trip with a friend of his to go cycling in the Netherlands. And this friend of his is super into the anticipation piece. So they keep having nights out where they go and they sit and have a beer together and look at like the different places that they're going to cycle to and talk about the trip. And Luke was just saying to me, like, it's been such a fun experience because he feels so much excitement for the trip because it's the act of creating the excitement. And so I just wanted to say that because I think you and Mark, like, by taking a step back and like putting so much intention into the trip, you're leaving space to like build that anticipation, which is a really special part of it.
Yeah,
So
it's
true.
making it every day is like more and more special heading towards it. But yeah, like I'm an impatient person too, so like I can't help but feel very tempted by all the tempting things that are out there. But
I'm with you. I would be like, Lucas, we got to go in the fall. We got to.
I know, Erin, you're like my vice because you're like, just go. I'm like, no, I can't.
But also, if waiting means you're able to go for longer, I think that's a very good reason to wait. Okay, so we've gone through a bunch of points that have been top of mind for me. Amanda, handing it over to you. Are there any mindful travel tips that have been top of mind for you going into 2025?
Well, yeah, actually, it's really funny that Katie mentioned going to Japan for the baseball because lately, for various reasons, I've just been thinking about and producing content on just more deeper travel. And one of the things, like recently I had an episode about traveling to watch or take part in sports, because that is a way a way to travel more deeply, in that sense of you're doing something that the normal people in your destination, the place you're going to, are doing. So, when you go to the baseball in Japan, you'll be amongst a great, crowd of local Japanese people who are there supporting their team. And it's such a lovely way to learn, properly more about the place you're visiting, because you're going that's going a level deeper. Traveling, like when we talked right back at the beginning about the why of your travel, and if your why is something that's actually not necessarily just for traveling or just to see somewhere new, but you're pursuing a deeper interest or learning something more about a hobby, or you've got some other kind of frame to go with your trip, then I think that a lot of the other things that we've been talking about fall into place naturally. And you naturally get to meet more local people, or you'll naturally stay somewhere longer because you might be doing a course, or you'll be off the beaten path and not in just the tourist hotspots because you've got like this other frame of why you're going. So I think that's something I've been thinking about a lot lately. And kind of connected to that, like I saw someone write about deeper travel in the sense of being like JOMO, like the joy of missing out. And I know that a lot of people travel with much more of a fear of missing out mentality. And I've been talking about it for years and doing more of it in the last few years. For example, it's not last year anymore, the year before last, on my last trip to Japan, I spent the entire 2 weeks up in Tohoku, so, north of Tokyo, not quite up to Hokkaido, hiking, going to museums. Like, we flew into Tokyo because we had to, and we had intended to spend some time in Tokyo either before or after, like, our hike. But there was so many things we wanted to see in the northern region, which is not where any tourists really go. And we wanted to see stuff that's not really on the tourist radar at all. But we spent, like, 5 minutes in Tokyo, literally. And and I've still never really seen much of Tokyo, but I didn't feel like I was missing out because I could explore this other region more deeply and see some stuff that I really was so memorable to me. And I know, like, a lot of people here, Japan keeps coming up, but it is such a big there's
a lot of attention on it right now.
Exactly. Yeah. And so many Australians are going because it's always been, for the last 10 years, been a really popular destination for skiing from Australia. they also all want to go and see Tokyo, Kyoto, maybe Hiroshima if they're lucky, and that's it, and I'm trying so hard to, like we talked about, Kate, go somewhere else, go into the countryside, go, there's so much to see all over Japan, but they don't want to miss out, I don't want to miss out on, but like, what are you, what do you really love, like a big city? What's, are you going because you really love that? Fine. If not, you're just going to tick a box, then don't do it, go to others. So many options. So yeah, that people do worry about, missing something, and I try and tell them to not do that.
Luke and I, when we were in Sri Lanka, we purposefully did not take the famous train ride that you see posted all over social media because we just didn't want to. We were just like, it's going to be crowded. Do we really need to do this? I think like the train rides we've been on have been really beautiful. I don't know like if it can get better than that. And everyone we talked to, like while we were in Sri Lanka, was like, I can't believe you didn't do it. And we were just like, we actually feel like so at peace about it. Like,
good. Well
to
done.
this day, zero regrets.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing about Tokyo, it's funny you bring that up because I was talking with my other friend who's going as well, like sooner. I think she's going in the next 2 months. And we were talking about Tokyo. And I guess my take is if you've never been to like an Asian mega city, give it 2 days, maybe 3, but don't spend all your time there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love what you said, Amanda, too, about, because this is where I'm at, I think, in where my head's been at with travel a lot over the last few years is like understanding what our interests are and kind of exploring a different side of them. So for us, yeah, we're big baseball fans here. And in Canada, there's there's one baseball team that we have that is super famous and we compete against all the American teams. But of course, like my partner knows all things about these amazing baseball players and a lot of them come from Japan. So for him, this is like a huge interest, and something we did when we were in the Dominican as well was to go visit some of the hometowns of these baseball players. And I don't think that's as common, but it was just a cool interest of ours, and we got to see where they trained. And another thing we're into is cocktails, and I know there's like so many wonderful cocktail bars in Tokyo. And we're also really into underground music, and this is something I've been exploring, is the punk scene in Tokyo and in Shinjuku. I'm trying to focus our trip around like just different layers of interests that we already have that we haven't explored before. So I'm pumped, and you made me feel more excited about this. The skiing is a big interest of mine. I have been a skier my whole life, so I would love to go to Japan in the wintertime, but I don't think that's part of the plan. Maybe one day.
I have so much intel for you on cocktail bars and also a bit on the punk scene because Luke
I know you do.
was in that space. Actually, like for that, you kind of do need to go to Tokyo, but
I think that version of Tokyo is like a really cool thing to do because you'll be with lots of local people. It won't be tourist central. So
yeah, honestly, whenever we're in Tokyo, we've been twice now. We just wander around. Like
I was gonna say, Amanda, thank you so much for joining us on the Japan podcast.
I'll be on the Japan podcast anytime you want.
Okay, I guess we should wrap this up officially. So, Amanda, what are you manifesting for yourself in 2025 when it comes to travel? This could be a place that you're hoping to get to or an experience you're hoping to have, really anything.
Yeah, I actually, for the first time in a long time, I have absolutely nothing booked yet for the year, which is weird, and no particular exact plan, but I've got a couple of things. I really want to just head to the east coast of Australia. So, I'm on Perth. It's like 5-hour flight to the east coast, but most of my friends live there. So there's the Japanese artist Yayoi Kusuma has an amazing exhibition on in Melbourne. I want to go there. And then if I'm there, I have to go to Canberra and Sydney and see all my friends. So that's something I'll probably do. And then the other thing, which I don't know what it'll be exactly yet, but my son he'll be 15 this year. We're getting to that age where traveling with mum will become rapidly less cool until, he's 30 again and then he's happy to. So, and what I'd really like to do, we've done a lot more in the last few years, trips where we don't have much planned or we've got, bits planned, but then, okay, now let's play it by ear. But what I'd really like to do is take him away for 4 to 6 weeks if we can swing it and go backpacking properly somewhere. Like my dream at the moment is like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, like the Baltic states, which I haven't been back to since like 2003. But I would love to do that and just like, land in Tallinn and fly out of, I don't know, somewhere where we'll end up and not really have a plan and just take it day by day and just, he's such a good travel buddy now. And he's great with directions. I always just say, you find this place. And I just like to introduce him to that kind of, relaxed, like, let's see what the day brings us travel. And I feel like that would be like a nice area to do it where it's a bit different, but it's still kind of really accessible for him. And yeah, so something like that is what I would love to do.
Your son, whenever you talk about him, I just think he sounds like the best kid. I hope I can meet him one day.
He is the best kid. Look, I'm a bit biased, but he's a pretty cool kid. So he has his faults for sure, and he's terrible at doing housework, but he's a great traveler.
He's also 15.
He's still a teenager, so you have to forgive him some things.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, he's a really good traveler. I admire that about him. So yeah.
I'm also manifesting kind of like, I don't know what to call it other than like cozy travels, in the sense that 2025 is the year that I'm focusing on like visiting people a lot. So I've already booked to go see my family in the Netherlands, then to go see my friends in the UK, and we might go somewhere else together after that. And then Luke and I are thinking about going back to Sicily, to his family home. So we're kind of like, maybe, 2024 was such a big year. Maybe 2025 is just the year where we go home, in a sense, to our like multiple homes in other countries to see people that we love very much. So yeah, I'm excited for that. And I'm going to be traveling to Northern Ontario to witness Katie and Mark getting married, which is very exciting.
Very excited for this. Yeah, you already know my big plans are Japan and my wedding this year. But honestly, I spent a lot of time last year traveling between like things for work and just like social engagements and that kind of thing. And I don't have too much on the books this year. So I'm excited to like hopefully manifest just chilling out and like gearing up and resting before the big trip that comes in 2026. And I love what you said about Jomo, Amanda, because my parents have a lot of travel plans planned for this year. They went to New Zealand last year. They're going to Croatia and Denmark this year. And I am fully in support of Jomo on all of their trips. I love seeing them travel and they have the best time, and I'm just excited to see what they get up to. So I'll be living vicariously through their travel plans.
Well, as per usual, thank you, Amanda, so much for joining us. I love chatting with you. You feel like a dear friend, even though you're literally on the opposite end of the planet. So
I feel sad. The same. I know. One day we'll meet in real life, but
I know we will.
Such a pleasure to chat. Oh, yeah. We will, 100%.
Yeah, it will happen for sure. Luke's never been to Australia and he keeps bringing it up, so don't worry. Australia is in our future. So where can people find you if they would like to learn more about you, listen to your podcast, or read your work?
They can find me by looking for the Thoughtful Travel podcast in all the podcast apps, or look me up on Instagram and on most of the other platforms with Amanda Kendall, and website at notaballerina.com.
Thanks for listening to Curious Tourism. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share it with a fellow traveler. If you're feeling extra generous, you can leave us a 5-star review or support us on Patreon. Anything you can do to support the show will help foster meaningful change throughout the travel industry. Curious Tourism is written and hosted by me, Erin Hines, and it's produced and edited by Katie Lohr in Canada's Toronto area. If you want to reach out to us, check the show notes for all the info you need. Stay tuned for a new episode next month, and of course, stay curious.